What if 3 days could transform your math teaching? At the NCTM 2026 Spring Conference, March 16th to 18th in New Orleans, you'll gain classroom-ready strategies, learn from expert educators, and connect with teachers who get it. March 16th to 18th. Invest in your practice. Register at nctm.org/NOLA 2026. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics welcomes you to Adding It All Up, a podcast created by and for mathematics educators and teachers. Join us each month as we explore current topics, insights, and emerging trends with thought leaders in the math community. And now, the hosts of Adding It All Up, NCTM President Latrenda and NCTM President-elect Dewey Gottlieb.
Hi, friends. Thanks so much for joining Latrenda and I for a new episode of Adding It All Up. I'm very excited to chat with our two guests who I have tremendous respect and appreciation for. And in preparation for today's conversation, I found myself doing a lot of reflection on my own experiences with math, both as a student and as an educator. And when I look back at my experiences as a student, so much of that was about memorizing and following steps to try to get the right answer quickly. And while being efficient and accurate are definitely important in mathematics, there are also hardly any opportunities for making sense of those quantities that we were being asked to deal with or what they represented, or thinking about why a strategy worked, or even considering if a different strategy may have been a better option. And I remember when I was teaching high school math, I had a student, she was a ninth grader, and she absolutely loved using the lattice method to multiply multi-digit numbers. You know, it was a strategy she learned in elementary school, and she held on to that for dear life. And after about 8 minutes of drawing a lattice and strategically placing the numbers in the appropriate spaces, she could produce the correct answer fairly consistently. But then when I asked the student, without actually computing or before calculating, estimate what might be a reasonable answer to this problem that we were trying to compute, for example. And when I asked her questions like that, I remember her just being stunned and didn't know how to think about that type of question. She wanted to just go straight to the mechanical process that she was taught and memorized, that she had some confidence in. And what I realized from her and many students like hers, their experience in math didn't give them the opportunities to truly reason about mathematics. And that challenged me and provoked me to think about how I needed to give my students different experiences so that they could understand and appreciate how powerful number sense and reasoning are in learning math. Latrenda, did you have any kind of similar experiences or reflections?
That's an interesting example that you gave. I like to tell people that as a student, I went to school back in the dark ages where it was important to have speed and accuracy. So I didn't know any better because that's how they taught. But there was always something in the back of my mind that there could be a different way. And it wasn't until I became a teacher that I really realized the importance of reasoning and people making sense of what they were doing. And so then I knew, okay, so that's why there was always a little unrest for me as a kid when we were doing all these speed drills and things like that, because I knew that you could do things a little bit differently, but it wasn't accepted back then in school when I was a kid.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. And the conversation that we're having today is going to challenge us maybe to think about how can we help students develop number sense, develop a sense of fluency and what that means and how that might translate into confidence in mathematics and how students see themselves as learners of mathematics. I'm excited to have this conversation today. I've seen both of our guests present at conferences. John SanGiovanni was in Hawaii last year presenting with a few of our districts. I got to participate. The room is always filled with excited teachers when these two guests are there presenting. So I really appreciate you both for being here today. Everyone on the podcast, help me welcome John SanGiovanni and Jenny Bay-Williams. We're so excited to have you. Why don't you take a moment, Jenny and John, to introduce yourselves, please.
Jenny Bay-Williams. My friends call me Jenny. Please call me Jenny. And I started as a middle school teacher, as Latrenda says, in the dark ages. And I became an elementary math specialist, ended up going to get my doctorate to find out all those answers about how we really ought to be supporting student learning. I became a professor 26 years ago, and I've been advocating for effective mathematics teaching ever since.
Well, hey, first, I'm John SanGiovanni, John by everybody else. Then you said your friends call you Jenny. I was like, well, I have some other names for you, but I won't share this. No, in all sincerity. So I am a district leader in Maryland. I've been a classroom teacher, elementary and middle school mathematics. I've been passionate about helping our students think and reason for themselves. And it dawned on me because I did go to school in the dark ages. I kind of taught in the middle ages, so to speak. But I remember very vividly one day doing math with my fourth graders, and what I was teaching them to do was not how I would do it myself. And I realized that day, many moons ago, that there wasn't something right with the way that we are pursuing the work. And I followed Jenny's work and other colleagues' work, and it inspired me to learn more and to do more.
I think that's great that you both have those experiences that you share with us. I think we all have come to a realization that we don't have to sacrifice reasoning, making sense, and understanding to make sure that students are able to demonstrate that automaticity when they need to do that. And I think it's wonderful that you guys have been doing this for so long and that we have this body of work to share with our educators so that we can help support them along their journey. So, Jenny, when you think about students who are truly successful in math, what do you notice about how they make sense of numbers, quantities, and relationships? Not just what they know, but how they reason and make decisions.
There's so much to say about that prompt, but I'm going to start with Dewey's example of the lattice method. That would be a non-example. I think it's nice to get excited about a way to do something. So there's nothing like awful about that, but it's not an efficient method. So what I would notice about somebody who is really successful is they're happy to learn a method like that, make sense of it, figure out why it works, that sort of thing. But for the most part, when they're doing a multiplication problem, they're thinking, I wonder what's a good way to solve this problem? Good meaning efficient. What are my choices? What might I select? And so that's a successful person when it comes to computational things. And then if you think bigger to just successful in math, there's this dispositional thing about just looking forward to a challenge and coming to it and reading a problem they don't know how to solve and really not wanting you to invade their space by showing them how to do it, but they really want the time to figure out how to do it. And so that is that person who's going to be successful in math, somebody who doesn't want to be shown how to do it. They have the efficacy and the disposition to want to figure it out.
I think that is so well said, Jenny, and I agree with everything. I think I would add to it the idea that something we want for every one of our students is agency in mathematics. And that doesn't come through mimicry of the lattice method, but it's about making decisions that you understand based on your perceptions and your preferences. I think it's discarded often when we force a procedure down a student's math road, if you will. And I think the other thing too is like the effect that has on dispositions towards math. We unfortunately know that so many adults have a distaste for math, mainly because they haven't been empowered to make choices about how they do math.
I think a key word there is this choice piece. You have two ways of thinking. You see a new problem we've never seen before. It could be 12 times 15. It could be some complex problem. And the human is either going to think, how am I supposed to solve this? In other words, how was I shown how to do it? How should I do it? Or how might I solve this problem? What could I do? It's the should, like I've been shown something, I've got to recall it. It's that memorizing. I remembered, what do I need to recall in order to solve this? Versus how could I like creatively think through this problem and solve it? So to me, this is the successful person, the one that realizes that they can design their pathway through the problem. They don't have to rely on something that they remembered from yesterday or 2 years ago.
Yeah, I remember from a presentation that I saw you give at the NCTM annual meeting, you talked about this idea of memorization and know from memory are two different things. And I remember it caused a little bit of buzz in the room. I mean, teachers were just like, what is it, and people were just kind of craving to have that conversation. There is often this perceived tension between knowing facts quickly and what we might describe as understanding deeply. So how might you help our listeners think about how students can develop fluency without losing focus on the sense making and reasoning?
Yeah, I think what you heard Jenny say was right on point about the act of memorization versus knowing from memory. Those are two different things. I didn't memorize my drive to work every day, but it's part of my memory. That's not the example I was looking for, but the audience understands. I think this tension between knowing facts quickly and understanding deeply is an undue tension. No one's saying it should be one or the other. It's actually that we want students to know and understand math deeply, right? And there's certain aspects of math that you experience frequently that is helpful that you just recall it with little thought or effort. And it's not just basic facts. That's where all the focus goes. But there's, finding equivalent fractions or knowing half of 100, which is not a basic fact, but we want students or humans to know half of 100 is 50 with little thought and certainly without drawing a picture. And not to say that we don't learn that at first, but over time, repetition and exposure and practice and all these other things, it just becomes something you know. And so that tension between understanding and recall is unnecessary. It's not one or the other from my perspective. But Jenny, what would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I think this thing is memorizing is a weak learning strategy. It's particularly a poor choice for students who struggle with math. People with learning disabilities have even more struggle with remembering. So instead of playing to people's weakness of remembering, then we try to do other activities and multiple experiences and just so much opportunities to do something like drive to work that eventually it becomes automatic that you know the answer to something. You can do something knowing equivalencies of 1/2. You're not going to remember all of them, but if you notice a pattern in how the numerator compares to the denominator, then you can generalize that idea and you can move among different representations of 1/2 or different equivalencies of 1/2. So I think this is so key to doing the fluency work because we do want automaticity with basic facts and automaticity with fraction equivalencies and a number of other things. But drill and rote practice to remember or memorize them is ineffective. There's much more effective ways for students to get to that automaticity.
Yeah, and Jenny, it dawned on me in the dark ages when back in the time when you had to remember your phone number and know your address, my students could remember everything, right? They knew their favorite athlete's jersey number. They knew their phone numbers. They knew all these things. Actually, there was nothing wrong with their memory, but yet they still had a tough time recalling facts because of the approach that at one point in my career I took, right? And it dawned on me that it wasn't them and it wasn't their memory. It was the approach that had to change. And for many of our students that has, but so many others, it hasn't yet.
Great. Thank you. I mean, that's such a wonderful way to think about just kind of reconceptualizing how we might approach that and make that just a different experience for students without losing what we feel are important with regards to what we want students to learn about mathematics.
John, I love your example about students knowing their favorite athlete's number and knowing their phone number and address and other things, because these are things that were meaningful to them. So they were connecting meaning to that. There was that sense making. So thinking about things like that, how can we as educators use classroom routines and everyday instructional choices to help our students move from doing math to actually using math in meaningful ways? So we actually are getting that stick-to-itness.
I think that when you engage students in routines, then just like the word says, certain things are becoming routine. Like, here's a problem, how might you solve it? So again, it's that disposition, that agency of how could I figure this out? That is a life skill, right? Oh, I've got this personal dilemma. I've got some choices. Which one am I going to choose to solve this thing? So there is this sort of loose connection to a dispositional piece that here's a problem. How are you going to solve it? Whether it's a personal problem or a mathematical problem. So I think that that's an interesting piece. But also as they are in a number talk and they're thinking about how they're solving it and they're thinking about how others have solved it and they're becoming adept at considering possibilities, that supports the kind of mathematical problem solving they are likely to encounter in their lives, whether it's with their finances or their shopping. These are the common examples, but figuring out how much time you need to do the 5 things you're going to do during the 2-hour period you have and chunking that. And we find differences all the time and things like that. So I feel like that adeptness with number helps us strategically think through our various daily tasks. So I'm not sure if that's getting at your prompt. You can push me harder, and John might have more to say on the topic.
Oh, I always do. So
I do know
I'll
that.
push you. I don't feel. Yeah. Throwing stones, are we? So I think you said it well, Jenny. I think that idea of just being routine, the opportunity for routine practice that's independent and isolated doesn't allow for the exchange of ideas and opportunity to hear how other people think. And routines, be they number talks or things that others write about, are opportunities to hear how others think about numbers to expand your perspective, not to actually narrow it. And you think about like when you learn to drive a car, nobody goes out and drives a car for 3.5 hours doing one thing. And the idea of like bursts of practice, be it for a fluency routine or a number sense type routine, doing that in an enjoyable setting routinely is the opportunity to get good at it and to maintain the skill.
I guess continuing on this idea of routines and the types of experiences that we want students to have multiple opportunities with, what are your thoughts about the types of learning opportunities that might best support students with explaining and justifying their thinking, particularly keeping in mind students who might not yet see themselves as math learners or math people?
I definitely want to hear what Jenny has to say about this as well. I think we have similar ideas, but I know that there's so much to say about this question. I mean, it always starts with a great task, right? And that doesn't mean an eccentric task that has to be convoluted, complicated, and 500 steps long, right? You can have a really good fluency task that's not complex, but offers lots of opportunity for discussion, for sharing of ideas. But even then, you need a teacher who is well-versed in the mathematics, confident, and able to facilitate that conversation, to shepherd that learning. There are things that we want to put in place for our students, too, to help them navigate the conversation in terms of supporting them with sentence structures or sentence frames so that they can communicate their ideas. It's important for us to provide feedback through that experience, to acknowledge what about their ideas worked, why it worked, and sometimes how to improve that thinking, right? Often is good job, great job, that was so good, but why? What about it was good, and does it work in other situations? And acknowledging that through their explanation and justification is certainly an opportunity. But I think that's just like the beginning, or just like a small slice of it. Jenny, what would you add to that?
Well, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how those ideas apply, whether it's a big problem or like a simple problem, like 12 times 15. And I'm reflecting on what Dewey said at the start about just trying to get stuff down quickly and how do we really set students up for success. So to me, one of the things is so basic, and it's been around since the dark ages, but it's still in present day, maybe not used as much as it could be, which is think time. Think time is so key to the opportunity for students to get their thoughts together before a discussion happens. This is the opposite idea of being fast at math, right? We're not trying to be fast. We're trying to reason, and people reason at different rates. So that think time is essential for every student to be able to get their thoughts together before they have a chance to talk. And then to process afterwards. Ooh, I heard this idea. This is how John thought about it. This is how I thought about it. Now I've changed my mind. Now I think I want to do this other idea. So I think this whole dialogue or this pacing matters. And then there's this opportunity, if I get to say, I decided to do it John's way. Well, now John has more excitement about the fact that somebody took up his idea. And so that builds this efficacy, this confidence for the learner. So I think that is one really big key is think time. It seems so simple, but we're in such pressure in classrooms to get so much done. We sometimes shave that much needed think time.
Looking for ideas you can use Monday morning? Attend the NCTM 2026 Spring Conference, March 16th to 18th in New Orleans, and walk away with classroom-ready strategies, fresh math tasks, and insights that save you planning time. Learn from experts, connect with fellow teachers. Register at nctm.org/NOLA 2026.
This is powerful because we never have enough time in the classroom just for anything. And sometimes we forget the power in just pausing and giving students time to think, to organize their thoughts, and even sometimes just to share with one person before they share with the group. So very powerful, very much in agreement, Jenny. I'll let Dewey weigh in, and then I have a question I want to ask that piggybacks on this thought you just shared.
I absolutely agree with what all three of you have shared. And I think the examples that you shared, Jenny and John, about these routines or practices, they're seemingly simple tweaks teachers might make space for. It's easier said than done. I totally understand that because, like you said, depending on how much time we have for math hour today or math period, there's a lot to get through. And creating that time so students have that opportunity just to even think before they respond. Or one of the things that I've seen, and many teachers have probably experienced similarly, is as soon as the first one student shouts out the correct answer, then the rest of the class thinks, well, there's no need for me to think anymore about it, especially if I haven't figured it out myself. And so taking some time, for example, to give that think time, and like Latrenda said, just give some time. Hey, just talk with your elbow partner to get that processing going. I just think those are such powerful moves. And it goes back to something that John said about, while it's seemingly a simple, a non-trivial teacher move, it also requires the teacher to kind of have this flow of the classroom and being able to respond in the moment to student thinking. And that's not easy to learn, but it's definitely something that we could tend to a little bit more when we think about teacher professional development and teacher growth.
One thing I would like to add to this discussion is that it's our job as teachers to help students establish their repertoire so that they have a collection of ways that they could solve a problem. And so that sets them up for success when you're asking, how did you solve that problem? Why did you pick that method? Well, if they have only one method in their repertoire, that's a non-starter. They have to have strategies in their repertoire. So that's where we can help them by providing a lot of opportunities through routines, through visual experiences to get that collection of strategies they really feel confident with. We can post a menu of the strategies on chart paper, on a bulletin board, and now they're set up for success because they feel confident with more than one way. They can look at their menu to see what way they think they want to use, and now they're set up to justify and explain the choices they made.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Jenny. And you made me think about knowing the questions to ask to expose the thinking. Often it's like, tell me how you did it. And that's the how, but there's so many other questions that are important to ask too. And so you're right, like teaching those strategies, they can move between them, but then asking questions about why they selected them, why they were good for that problem is important.
Such a good point.
It's all about giving students choices and empowering them to make those choices. When you mentioned about the repertoire, Jenny, I thought about when I taught young kids, I would tell them they had to build their math toolbox. And so one of the things that they were challenged to do was to find as many strategies, as many choices you could make to add to your toolbox. And instead of us like putting it on chart paper, they actually got to take a composition book and say, you make your own. And so you keep them there, and then you had an opportunity to share them with others. So that meant that they wanted to challenge themselves to find multiple ways to demonstrate their abilities to do that. So I love thinking about how we can empower our educators to do things like that in their classrooms. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. We definitely are grateful to have this small opportunity to talk to you two wonderful folks. And so in thinking about all the things that all of you have said during our discussion, thinking about building student agency, building student confidence. And so we want to think about if we wanted to provide just a couple tips or ideas to those educators who need to know, how do I get started with this? So what are some things that you would say to a teacher who says, how do I get started with this? And why is it important? Explain why is it important to focus on numeracy and strategic fluency support to build student agency and confidence, especially for some of those teachers who may be thinking, how do I support my students who struggled in the past? And so they're a little bit reluctant to dive into making choices and feeling confident about their choices. How would you tell them why it's important to focus on numeracy and strategic fluency support?
Numeracy is critical to fluency. So let's just start with how to build a case to think about, for example, numeracy is knowing that like 9 is 1 less than 10, that 99 is 1 less than 100. And that relationship, that relational understanding, that numeracy helps us to reason and solve math problems more efficiently. So I think a question to say is, if you're adding like 99 plus 35, how does that relationship help you? the fact that 99 is one away from 100, how does that help you solve it? And so the numeracy helps build the fluency, because the fluency is being able to solve 99 plus 35 efficiently, which in that case would not be stacking and using a standard algorithm. It would be noticing that 135 is 100 plus 35. So 99 plus 35 is one less. So I think the numeracy is critical to the fluency. Like, really, it's not a debate between conceptual understanding and procedural fluency. Procedural fluency requires that conceptual understanding, that numeracy. So I think that's really, really critical. What I hear most as sort of the argument where I have to build the case is the worry that teaching more than one way will just overwhelm students. It's enough to get one method down. That's probably the most common pushback I get on fluency. And if you only have one tool in your toolkit, as you said, Latrenda, well, there's no option to make a choice. And there goes the agency. They're not choosing. They're just recalling the one method they know. And so they need a repertoire. Every child deserves to have a repertoire of strategies. And so if you start there, then you start thinking about which ones are really super useful for their repertoire. And then we start working on those in a conceptual way. What I have noticed has worked when I'm working in classrooms with students who struggle, we say to the students, hey, today we're learning a new idea. So we're not going to use the ways we've already learned that you already feel good about. We're going to take on a new idea. So for today, let's just focus on that. Give yourself a chance to fall in love with this new idea. And that has really helped some of the reluctance of students who maybe lack that confidence. Now they've got a new thing in their repertoire. They have two things to choose from, and they start choosing, and you can just see their agency grow and their confidence grow in doing mathematics. So those would be my tips. Make sure that we're building on that numeracy, and really make sure we have at least two ideas in their repertoire so they have the option to choose.
I think my advice or my guidance or support to teachers I work with and teachers listening is to think about your own numeracy and fluency and what you do well with, but also what strategies that maybe you struggle with in pursuing learning more about them, or just arming yourself with as much information as you can about the different ways that we can compute and reason and such, so that we can cast a wider net and support more students.
I love it. Support more students. More is better than less.
And I love how both of you, throughout the conversation today, presented a different view of this. Is it this or is it that? Kind of just breaking that down is, no, they go together. One helps the other. I really appreciate you both for being explicit, saying that it's not a battle of one or the other, that these are both important things that we need to take responsibility for developing. And I just absolutely loved our conversation today. And it kind of makes me excited to go see some classrooms and watch teachers doing this really exciting work. I think you've influenced a lot of teachers and leaders to rethink how the type of experience you can give for students in the mathematics classroom. So thank you. I appreciate you for all the work that you do and for being here with us today. And also for those listening, Jenny and John are going to be joining us at the upcoming NCTM spring conferences in New Orleans in March. John's going to be joining us, doing a pre-conference session as well on doing math to using math, like, again, around this idea of developing numeracy. If you're going to be there, I definitely hope you check out the pre-conference sessions with Jenny and her colleagues, as well as John. And if you haven't decided to go yet, hey, strongly encourage you to go. We got some really exciting folks who are going to be sharing a lot of great ideas and their strategies, just general wisdom for how we can inspire students. So thank you all for joining us. Hopefully you'll join us next month and we have another exciting episode of Adding It All Up.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Adding It All Up. At NCTM, we strive to bring you the biggest topics happening in mathematics. Join us next month for another exciting discussion.